What is up, guys? Alex Rudinger here. Today I'm going to give you some tips on tuning up the new Evans DB1 low volume drum heads. These things are a ton of fun to practice with. They're also very easy to tune up and work great, so don't worry about that. Then I'm going to tell you about some of their features, do some demonstrating, and yeah, it's going to be rad. So let's go ahead and jump right in. All right, guys, so first up, we are starting with the snare drum. I have here the Evans DB1 snare head. This is different than the 14-inch DB1 tom head because the snare head actually has this plastic film. I don't know if you can see that. You can hear it, though. Kind of sounds very snarey, and that's going to be what actually gives the drum the snarey sound. So, in fact, you don't even have to have traditional snare wires on the drum at all. You either should turn the throw off to the off position or just remove the snare wires entirely, which is what I've done here. All you need is this head. So let's go ahead and put this on. We're gonna bring it up to finger tension and then we'll go from there. So you may see me using the drum key here, but I'm actually not using it for its full torque yet. I'm just using kind of the cylindrical bit to, help me get a better grip to bring everything to finger tension. And we're about there. So the other thing about the snare sim technology, which is what the plastic on the underside is called, is that the tighter you make the head, the more sensitive that snarey emulation is going to be. So you want to kind of bring it up in tension slowly so you don't kind of overdo it. First, let's just hear how it sounds. This is just finger tight. Yeah, so you can hear the snareness is kind of like almost bloated sounding, for lack of a better adjective. But as we add tension, it's going to start to sound a lot more focused. So we'll start with just quarter turns, nothing crazy. I did a little bit more than a quarter turn on a couple of these where I could just tell that they weren't quite as high in tension. I know a couple of these lugs tend to stick a little bit. So when you're doing finger tight, it feels like they're tighter than they are, but, that happens with older drums sometimes. So let's see how this sounds now. It's wild because you can almost hear how, the snares have this little kind of overtone or after ring where it sounds very much like how an actual snare drum would react, That little... You know what I'm saying? That's very much how real snare wires would react. So we're already getting a lot more focus out of it. Let's bring it up a little bit more. I could tell this one was a little bit less tight than the rest. Let's see how that sounds. See, I like that. The snare is a little bit more defined. Ooh, for a mesh head, that sounds rad. I mean, it's not going to sound, super thick and beefy like a real snare drum, but for a mesh head, the whole point being low volume, that's pretty incredible. So let's see how that sounds a little bit more. So yeah, I mean, when you're playing rim shots, it still has some volume, but not nearly the volume that a traditional Mylar head would have. The snare reaction and the sensitivity, it almost to me reminds me of like a marching snare. When you tune up a marching snare, you get that extra sensitivity because of the snare wires oftentimes are plastic in marching stuff. So it definitely has that kind of a threshold, if you will. But it works great. And for, a mesh head, it sounds remarkable. And I really like the snare wires being built into the head. It's just kind of like one less thing to worry about. So I'm really happy with that. We're going to leave that there and move on to toms. Let's check it out. All right, guys, moving right along. I have the 10-inch tom here. I've gone ahead and put the DB1 tom head on already. I just have not actually tightened it up. It's just at finger tension. And before we do anything to the batter head, we're going to move to the resonant head, because when you're using a mesh head, you're actually going to get most of your pitch from the resonant head. It makes sense, you know, the air moving down the drum, you know, is going to reflect off of the Mylar resonant head. So you want to first kind of decide on your pitch by tuning up the bottom head. Now, I like a very low, you know, drum sound in general for toms. And this is just kind of where the bottom head was before, when I had, you know, normal drum heads on. And it's about right. I'm going to bring it up maybe a tiny bit. Other thing that makes tuning mesh heads so easy is that you really don't have to be too specific. You know, it's like there's not a ton of sustain because the head is mesh in general. So, you know, you don't have to be quite as particular with each and every tension rod as you might be with, you know, more traditional Mylar heads. You're kind of just looking for an overall pitch that makes sense. For a 10-inch tom, that sounds about right. So let's, before we even add any tension to the top, let's just see how that sounds. And you can kind of hear the sustain of that bottom head, which I like. So we're going to stick with that, and we're just going to start tensioning up the batter head, doing quarter turns. You know, and again, for toms, I like a super low, very loose sound. So we're not going to add too much tension at all. Let's see how that sounds. You can hear that there's actual pitch difference between the different tension rods, though. So if you want to get specific, you can. Sounds great. So another cool thing about the DB1 is this impact patch here. You can remove this. It is removable and replaceable. So if you take it off, you're going to have a little bit less attack and maybe a little bit more sustain. But I actually really like how it sounds with it on. Not to mention these DB1 heads in general, not to mention the DB1 cymbals, they all look really cool, which as a nerd, I very much appreciate. That sounds great to me. Let's bring it up just a tiny bit more. There we go. You have just a little bit of sustain. That's perfect. It's just enough sustain where it feels and sounds and kind of reacts like a real tom, but very quiet. I love that. Let's hear how that sounds without the patch. I think the patch actually really helps. I mean, when you're doing this kind of low volume stuff, anytime you're practicing at a low volume, what you're really going to hear the most of is the attack. So having that extra attack with the impact patch, personally, I really like. For a mesh head, that's pretty rad. So let's go ahead. I'm going to do a floor tom next, and then we'll go from there. All right, so just like the 10-inch tom, I have the 16 here. I've already put the DB1 head on to finger tension. Check the bottom head. Sounds like a good tone for a 16-inch floor tom. This is just finger tight on the batter head. If anything, I think maybe I brought the bottom head up too much, but let's wait and see. Let's add a little bit of tension, just again, quarter turns or even less. Let's see how that sounds. I almost think that a couple of the tension rods, I may have gone too tight just from using my fingers off camera. So let's bring it back down a little bit. So you can really hear how much of a difference the resonant head makes. I hope you can hear it at least. It's such a low tone with a mesh head, but the resonant head makes a big difference. So I had it a little bit too tight. I had to bring it down overall, and now it's sitting much more like how I would like to have a 16-inch floor tom. It's just much quieter. Touch up the top a little bit. And let's hear what this sounds like without the impact patch. Personally, I like the impact patch a lot more. So that has a nice bit of sustain, plenty of attack, but obviously it's very quiet, which is the whole point. But I really like that with these DB1 heads in general, you still have some tone and you have an actual feel of a real drum head, but minus the volume. I'm reluctant to bring it up too much more because I like the way it feels too, and that's a big part of this, you know? Like when you're playing with mesh heads, it's already a little bit weird for it to not be a normal drum head, so to have it feel like a real head still is also important. I like that. All right, I'm gonna change the 12 and the 14 off camera. Next, I'm gonna do the kick, and then I'm gonna show y'all what it all sounds like, so let's get to it. And last but not least, kick drum. So the DB1 for the kick is very similar to the toms, however the impact patch is made of a Kevlar material instead of more like a nylon, I would think, on the toms. So it's just going to be more durable, which is good depending on what beaters you use. Right now I have almost no tension on it. You can see that it's very loose. It's barely even finger tight, in fact. Now, I like a really loose, kind of attack-heavy kick drum, especially for rock and metal. So the kick is going to be the easiest yet, but just with almost no tension, let's just see what it sounds like. So with the impact patch on, it sounds like it has a lot of attack, a lot more high-end. I find that with the impact patch off, it immediately sounds more like you would hear a kick drum sound. Just more low-end, a little bit less attack. And the other cool thing about this is that depending on where your beaters go, you know, you can move it. So I think I still, in general, want to use the impact patch just for durability factor. But let's go ahead and see what happens when we add a little bit of tension. So we're just going to do... ooh, it looks like I didn't even get these to finger tight yet. Okay, let's see what that's like. Now, because I have the drum on top of a drum throne, we're not going to hear any resonance from the resonant head right now. But, you know, in general, you want a super low-end sound with your kick. I keep the resonant head just as loose, if not looser, than the batter head. So I'm very confident that that's going to sound great. I almost like it better without the impact patch. It's going to sound a little bit different once we start hitting it with beaters. But that might sound sick too. So you know what? I'm going to leave it right there tension-wise. I might even bring it down a little bit, at least a couple of the tension rods. Because again, that's kind of how I like my kicks. In context, I'm very confident that this is going to sound great. All right, guys, that's it for me today. I hope you enjoyed. And if you're looking to lower the volume of your practice, make sure to check out the new DB1 Drumheads by Evans. And while you're at it, check out the DB1 cymbals. They are rad. And, you know, it's hard to not be sick when it's made by Evans. So make sure to check it out, and I will see you all next time. Peace.